In fact, they are from Chris Moody and Ross Lambert. Chris Moody.
Yes, I currently own a small retail business, and there seems to be a lot of confusion at the moment about the impact of the carbon tax on the prices that I'm going to have to pay. I suppose, how can I realistically pass those increases on to my customers? And if I can't, how do I remain in business?
Okay, we've got another small businessman in the audience, Ross Lambert, or at least representing small business.
The carbon tax will be long remembered in the future as one of the most questionable and controversial taxes on economic activity in Australia. Given the slimmest profit margins of small business today, isn't it likely this carbon tax is likely to be the straw that breaks the camel's back in regard to small business viability?
Greg Combet, let's start with you on this.
If you'd forgive me, I'd just like to finish too what I was saying, and I'll be very brief, I promise. But whatever policy response you take has a cost to it, if you accept that there needs to be a policy response. And I know, for example, in New South Wales, it's been quite popular, that scheme to have solar panels on rooftops, for example. The cost of that scheme for each tonne of greenhouse gas that is reduced is around $400 a tonne of greenhouse gas. And we're looking at a carbon price in the economy of $23 a tonne. We've considered all those issues and tried to design the thing with least cost to the economy. In terms of its impact, there are currently only 300 companies on the list that will have a direct liability to purchase a permit for each tonne of greenhouse gas that they emit. But they will pass some of their costs through, for example, a coal-fired electricity generator. And for a small business, we've worked with the Small Business Association. It's really the cost of electricity that is affected. The electricity is a proportion of the overall costs of a small business, according to the Small Business Association, is about 2 to 3% of costs. A 10% increase, which is the influence on the electricity price of carbon pricing, is therefore a 0.2% increase in costs. And a typical small business uses about 10 megawatt hours of electricity a week, and that's going to mean about a $5 a week increase in costs. Now, it's a modest cost impact. All small businesses are affected by that. They can pass the cost through to consumers. It's a very small amount of cost, but that's why we're using around 60% of the revenue from the carbon price to pay to households so that they can meet that very modest cost impact, which across the economy is only 0.7%, less than a cent in the dollar.
All right, I'll just say this. We're obviously all a little bit unsettled by the fact that Simon's had a seizure and has had to be taken off. We'll try and bring some information to you and to the audience here as to how he is as it comes to hand. In the meantime, I'd like to go back to the first question of Chris Moody, who talked about having a small business and having unforeseen costs. Tell us what you believe your costs are going to be.
Well, I think the costs are fairly widespread, really. It's not just a matter of electricity. It's a matter of the costs are going to come from the suppliers. They're going to come from the manufacturers. They're going to come from other people who are going to increase the cost of the goods that I have to pay, my cost of goods, and so it's going to have a cumulative effect. And then that's going to...
Are you already hearing from suppliers and others that they're going to be putting costs up?
I was hearing from suppliers last week or last month that they're going to have to review their prices. And half of them don't even know why, I'm sure, but they're still already alerting me of the fact. And we're already seeing customers walk out of retail shops in droves at the moment because of the way the economy is. The consumers aren't prepared to pay 1 cent more for the prices in the stores. It's not like we're making huge margins. We're making very small margins. And this is another scary tax that's going to have an impact.
We'll get a response from the Minister from that.
I think a lot of people have been frightened by the debate, and there's been a lot of false things said, in truth, and I'm glad that the scheme has now started so that we can actually live the reality of it. There's no carbon price on on-road transport, for example, that brings the goods to your small business, or on heavy on-road transport, or on light commercial vehicles. Electricity is the main thing that is affected, and the average cost around the country is a 10% increase. Now, it's not a good thing, obviously, in the sense that in New South Wales, just as an example, electricity has increased by 55% in the last 3 years. Around the country, it's increased by an average of around 40%, and it has nothing to do with carbon pricing. It's everything to do with the investment in the poles and wires. But that hasn't been the end of the world. It has created pressures, but no one's been compensated for that. What we've got here, though, is a 10% electricity increase. It averages about $3.30 a household per week, averaged across households in Australia, and the government is using the revenue from the carbon price to pay to households an average of $10.10 a week in assistance. Now that will support demand. It allows you to pass very small cost increase that are involved through to households, but we're returning it in the form of tax cuts, pension increases, increases in family tax benefits, and many other Commonwealth payments. And that will support demand in the economy, and millions of people will in fact be better off because we're paying them more than the expected price impact.
Sophie Mirabella.
On the government's own figures, millions of people will be worse off. There are, in fact, people who have not reached the age of 65, who are on low incomes, who don't get the seniors card, so they don't get the payment, don't earn enough to pay tax. They'll be paying more in council rates, more for their groceries, more for their electricity, and they get nothing. The carbon tax is supposed to hurt your hip pocket. The carbon tax is supposed to add costs. And you're right, the whole supply chain will be affected. And when you have a carbon tax that will keep going up and up and up, $350 by 2050, of course it's going to hurt business. And when Greg tries to speak in soothing tones that it's minimal, it won't do anything, we've already seen the impact of the carbon tax on manufacturers who are operating at a very marginal level or even making a loss. Since the carbon tax was announced in February of last year to May of this year, we've seen 41,700 jobs go in manufacturing, and that is one manufacturing job every 15 minutes.
I'm going to take you up on that because Paul Howes said it was offensive for you to make that claim, particularly when a lot of those jobs were lost over 7 months.
That's also
when there was
true.
no carbon price whatsoever.
Well, from February 2011 to May this year, the number of jobs lost since the carbon tax announcement, and they're all in the ABS statistics. Paul Howes, I'm sure, is very upset. Paul Howes is upset about a lot of things. He's upset that the steelworkers he's supposed to represent are really angry with him. He's upset that a lot of the manufacturing workers that he's supposed to represent are really angry with him because he's decided to represent the woman he installed as kingmaker, Prime Minister, instead of the workers who she is harming. That's why Paul Howes is upset.
Okay, let's hear from someone who's relatively independent in this argument. I mean, do you, Lenore, you've studied this very closely. Do you accept that jobs are being lost, have already been lost because of a coming carbon price?
No, not really. I think it's a different thing to say that jobs have been lost since the announcement and jobs have been lost because of the announcement. And I noticed Sophie hasn't made the latter claim. And a bunch of other things have happened to manufacturing over those same months, like they've been coping with the vastly appreciated Australian dollar.
3 cents it went up in that time, 3 cents.
And other pressures. There's many other pressures on manufacturing. That said, to go back to Chris's question, I think the manufacturing sector is under pressure, and there is a sense that they are trade exposed in many cases, and I think there is an issue, a live issue for the manufacturing sector. For retailers, I don't really understand why Chris feels that he can't pass on the cost to his customers. I don't understand where he thinks his customers are going to go if not to buy here, whether, can they get your product offshore? Is there another place they can go for your product? Because the way it's supposed to work is that domestic retailers who aren't trade exposed can pass the price on, and for anybody for whom that price impost would be a burden is getting compensated. That's the theory, and I'm interested in the real world example as to why that might not work for a retailer.
I'm going to interrupt you for a minute. We've got a couple of hands going up in the audience.